Hello there, and good afternoon. I'm speaking from a slightly overcast southern England. I'm hoping we'll have a nice, bright and happy presentation from our colleagues from the University of Sheffield. So we have Pete Mella, Kat Bazela, and Rob Spark, who are going to be talking about the question of, should we see students' cameras when we teach online synchronous sessions? So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you guys to start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So thanks for joining us today. We're going to be looking through this presentation, which is looking at, it's basically a smaller version of a session we ran for staff development last year. It's going to be quite interactive. We're going to ask you to keep asking us, well, giving answers to questions, answering the questions as we go through in the chat. So we'd really like to see good use of the chat, and Rob is also in there as well. But what we'd like to start with is a question before we start. And what we'd like to ask you is, this platform we're using doesn't have cameras for participants, but if it did, and we demanded right now that you switch your camera on, would you do it? And if you wouldn't do it, just very quickly, without thinking too hard about it, why you wouldn't switch your camera on if we asked you. So we'll just give you a second or two to do that. Just sort of knee-jerk reactions to that. You know, if we asked you to switch your camera on, why might you not do it right now? Okay, so we'll just wait for some of those to come in. Maybe everyone would be super happy, which is why no one's replying just yet. So we'll let those come in. That's one answer. Haven't washed your hair. Yeah, that's YouTube user would. Thanks, YouTube user. So yeah, so there's yeah, some people say they slow down a computer, and yeah, so all kinds of issues like that. And some people, yeah, so actually very confident group of people. Probably 50-50 in terms of yes or no for doing so. And we'll talk about some of these things later. So just a bit of context on this. This is based on a session that we did in January 2020 with a very similar title for staff, because there are lots of sector-wide discussions on this topic in terms of should we be asking students to feedback from staff that they don't like teaching when students have their cameras turned off, and people asking, can we mandate this? Can we tell our students to do it, and what problems are there doing it? And it's to look at sort of the technical, moral, ethical questions that arise in this. So I'm going to hand over to Kat, who's going to tell you some more about how we developed this session.
Hi all. So we'll just start with a bit of background information as to why we developed the session. So during the initial onset of the pandemic, when the first lockdown came in, we were forced into an unprecedented situation whereby teaching moved to online overnight. When keeping track of what was happening around the HE sector, we could see that there was a catalyst to look at accessibility and psychological barriers to online learning. We recognised that unlike distance learning courses, students didn't sign up to these courses envisioning that they'd be undertaking most of their learning in the format of online. So as the digital learning team at the University of Sheffield, we were looked at to provide guidance on online learning. We wanted to encourage those leading sessions to think about issues the students were having when experiencing online learning for the first time, probably in their university careers. And we undertook a literature search to look for pedagogical and accessibility issues surrounding online learning. However, most was pre-pandemic due to the publishing timelines, and it largely focused on language learning and distance learning. We did find bits starting to come through, which was mainly non-peer review papers, websites and blogs looking at anecdotal evidence. So as Pete said, we developed a session and ran it in January for looking at these reasons. So now We're just going to look at reasons that you keep cameras on. So I'm just going to talk for this bit and then we'll get to asking you some questions. So there's certain scenarios where it may be pedagogically valid for students to keep the cameras on in a session. So as we've said, it's extremely useful in language teaching. So you can pick up extra communicative gestures that are part of the language acquisition. As part of discussions in the virtual classroom, interactions between student and tutor or students together. So reading non-verbal cues about the discussion taking place. Can also apply to breakout rooms as well, where you're discussing elements of the session. It's easier to help with awkward silences, so you can see people thinking instead of thinking that they're not participating. You can also follow others to see if they're gauging the understanding of what's been said. So, for example, people nodding along with you or maybe looking confused. And it can foster different ways of learning as well. We've seen as well deeper engagement with lecture and material. So in one of the papers that we read, it said being able to see students through virtual synchronous live lectures is important for faculty so they can modify the pedagogy, pacing and presentation of concepts on the course. So again, using that learner feedback and non-communicative gestures. And then we've seen in more practical courses as well, like clinical psychology courses, where you need to make visual assessments on each other. It's needed to do that. We've seen students with specific learning difficulties may benefit from the interaction and cues in order to actively participate. So, for example, if people rely on lip reading, it's easier for participants to have cameras on so they get a better read of what's being said. And also it can build community in the classroom, so you can put a name to a face. Okay, so we'll now move on and I'll hand back over to Pete.
Thanks, Kat. So the first question we asked our participants, and it's a question we're not going to ask you. I think this audience of this conference will be well aware of the technical issues that face people when participating in synchronous sessions, but some of them are things that people don't always think about. So one is device ownership. During the pandemic, we make a lot of assumptions about device ownership. We make a lot of assumptions about what young people own. Device ownership isn't that simple to talk about because it might be you have a device, but there's competition for that device. If you're in a home, it might be something that's shared between siblings, shared between parents and children, and that kind of thing. So it's just saying you have access to a computer doesn't necessarily mean you have that at all times to learn with. Bandwidth concerns as well is something we've all experienced. Access to broadband, again, is a complicated one. It can be a financial issue. It can be a really quality issue. The competition for broadband is another one. People don't always realize that if you've got two people working from home, that can cause you issues. If you've got children in the house, that might cause you issues. If you've got people in the house who don't appreciate that you might need this for your learning, then that bandwidth is getting hammered. And switching your camera on is going to be a problem for those people, and receiving multiple cameras from other participants even. And then some people just live in locations where we can't. We have colleagues who live out in the Peak District, and some parts of the Peak District are very good for broadband and some aren't so good. And it just depends where you live. So, some people don't have the luxury of amazing broadband at all time and might just need to switch their camera off just to be able to access what they need to do. And then we've got questions of digital skill. Learners are out on their own in situations where they can't just pop and get the same sort of support that they might be able to get on campus, and even sometimes talking through things like clearing your cache or updating your browser and things like that aren't necessarily things that everyone has at their fingertips. So the technical issues are there, and sometimes just being able to access your learning without having to worry about how you share your camera can be something that's necessary for students to progress with this.
I'll just remember to unmute myself there. So now we're on to the non-technical issues, and this is where we're going to ask you some questions to interact in the comments. What non-technical issues have you or your students faced when participating in synchronous sessions? So if you'd just like to give us some issues that you've faced or that are non-technical. So for example, we can look at sort of home life issues or anything like that that's not to do with broadband that have stopped you participating.
Yeah, and what we'll do is as they come into the chat, we'll start talking through them. What we'll do, we'll wait for them to come through, is maybe just give an example of one. So one example might be, for example, seeing into a student's home life is a very unusual thing to do. So for example, at the moment you can see my house, you can see Kat's house, you can see Rob's house. Now, this has been the case all through the pandemic. These backgrounds are very familiar to anybody who's ever had a meeting with us. But this is an unusual situation, and looking into people's home life really shows inequality. It shows differences in people's social status. It shows people different socio income. It shows other people in the house and all that kind of thing. So it does show a sort of potential inequality, which people might not be willing to share. Do you have anything in the chat you want to pick out?
Yeah, there's quite a few comments coming in. So we've had Zoom fatigue, learning differences, caring responsibilities, noise in the background. Yep, I can't tell you how many times the window cleaners have managed to come around when I'm in a meeting talking. Again, not being in a very appropriate space, messy room, bad hair day. Yep, I can sympathise with that one. Amazon deliveries, taking care of children at the same time. This one looks a bit of a hybrid one. People having lunch in the office behind you as well. Some people have rooms at home where they can study, others don't. So yep, the example of my room, you can probably guess it is a spare room that I'm in, which had to have a shuffle round to fit me in. Being on camera all day. We've got, for example, mental health, students reported anxiety, power cuts, yep. Noisy neighbours, that a tutor's dog snored too loudly. Yep, that's why my cat is outside of the room, because he definitely can snore. Open plan offices, confidential information in the background. So got a wide variety of issues there that we've all encountered. Streakers, I don't think I've experienced one of those running by in the background.
No, I mean, that's something. I mean, you'd think in 18 months we would have had that at least once, but you do hear scare stories of people accidentally walking in on camera when they shouldn't. Definitely.
Yep, and again, terrible quality Wi-Fi. Yep, so pixelated people on cameras. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to what we found when we were looking at things. So let me just nudge the slides on. So we found home life and privacy. So home life can interfere with the situation. So like we said, whilst students have been encouraged back to accommodation for a lot of it, not all students live in halls of residence or in a student home where they can comfortably show the cameras. So example, the workspace being a window into your life, as Pete said earlier. People have a right to privacy when it comes to your personal life. So there's certain aspects of home life where you probably don't want your classmates or professors to see. Learning spaces at home in shared houses you might not be able to have space that was, that would be considered a traditional learning space. So for example, if you're using your bedroom, there might be the bed in the background and you don't want people to see into your bedroom. And then we've got, you don't need to have an excuse not to share your surroundings. As we said, students didn't sign up to this point, so being sort of forced into sharing cameras. And this is in a non-assessment type way. We've just mean, general online learning. It can be a bit almost embarrassing to share into your home life. Bullying and trolling as well. So, people might pick up on some inequalities just based on your home life. Got mental health as well, so mental health issues. Having your camera off doesn't mean that you're not engaging. You can have your camera on and you can be looking at a different tab. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're not engaging. So I've just seen a comment pop up there that's made me smile. Someone dressed as a dinosaur in a dinosaur costume. in an online lecture. That's brilliant. And some students might be more engaged to participate in class if they're not worried about how they look when they're speaking. So, for example, it's a bit of a change from being in the traditional, lecture theatre with rows that we've all seen. If you're speaking, when you speak on camera, sort of everyone is looking at you, whereas when you're in the lecture theatre, you might be speaking from the back of the room forward. So, you're seeing back of people's heads rather than everyone staring at you with cameras on. And as we said, it's a mental toll, it's tiring. So as we're on day 3 of this conference, I'm sure we've all had some fatigue with cameras and been sat in front of a screen all day. We've got inclusivity as well. So it's an acknowledgement of differing economic positions. So you can see inequalities based on many things. So race, income, some people might feel uncomfortable sharing the background. And like we said earlier, it can reveal your social class, which, you might not want to do. For example, people might have to sit on the stairs to do the work and might not want to show that. It would show that, they maybe can't afford a bigger place. So we've seen in some papers where lecturers have said, can you email concerns? But again, we wouldn't ask to do that. It's quite largely unethical for people having to divulge that information. We've also got the separation between work and life. So that has become a very blurred line at the moment. So, for example, I'm in a situation where I'm lucky enough to have a spare room and I can just shut the door at the end of the day. But we know that some people have just been in the living rooms and it's no switch off. Safeguarding as well, so you can give away details. We've had people say personal information in the background that we don't want to share. Time difference is one as well. So, for example, international students, we've had a few people presenting from Australia and West Coast of America, Canada. And, you might not want to be presenting in the middle of the night, showing your camera in the middle of the night when you're probably not feeling your freshest. So we've sort of said people can engage how they want without having to change who they are. So I'm going to hand over to Pete now, who will follow up with the feedback and reflections that we had on the session.
Cheers, Kat. Yeah, so the session we did, I think when we ran those questions that we've run for you, I think the technical implications, very little of that was a surprise to people. People have encountered all these technical implications. I think we all have to a certain degree. Some of the issues we talked about in terms of accessibility and ethical issues and inclusivity, people hadn't always thought through, and I think this is something that I think as practitioners we need to just remember, that people just haven't thought of these issues. They're new to everybody. We did have a really good piece of feedback, that a question which we couldn't have an immediate answer to. We had to think about this, which was, if we record the sessions, does this change the advice? Does this change the way it works? And I do think that permanence does, and I think that is something that we need to think about. I think in particular, we're not really talking about the same old lecture capture kind of arguments. We're talking about these arguments about when people are in their home life and you're recording people's cameras from home and that kind of thing. So we ran a second session exploring those kind of issues, which was really interesting as well. I think as well, we just always have to say that the tutor having the camera on is a different question. Some of these issues do still exist and should be thought about, but there are accessibility issues in terms of lip reading and things like that, which are very important, which might not be the same as just having 40 people's faces on the screen for less reason. But I do think when doing this and talking to our academic colleagues, we do have to recognise that teaching is hard when you just see a sea of switched off cameras, and we have to appreciate that it is difficult. And sometimes it can be about making students feel more relaxed and finding ways to alleviate some of their concerns on this. And I think as well, people use this as well, so we need to do it because we need to know students are engaged, and seeing a student's camera is a very bad way of monitoring engagement. I think it's been touched on in the chat already, which which is that just seeing someone's face is pointing at a camera in their screen doesn't tell you they're engaged with you. It tells they're looking at their computer and they're looking at something. And there's a really good way of putting it, which was present absenteeism from Rod. That was a great way of putting it. And so we need to find other ways, and things like we've done today, where we ask you to pitch in on the chat and we get that interaction from you in that way, is possibly more meaningful than just seeing everybody in a big row and feeling like they're looking at us when maybe they're not. So camera use doesn't prove that people aren't engaging, and it doesn't prove that people are engaging. So I think that's a bit of a red herring in the discussion, but with absolute recognition that it is hard to teach when you've just got a blank screen in front of you. So yeah, there's some of our feedback and reflection. I think we're just about on time, which is a miracle for us. So I think that's the time to go over to questions if people have any. Oh, I forgot to say as well, there is another session from Tim O'Riordan later this afternoon, which we saw on the programme, which covers a similar topic, and we're really looking forward to seeing a different view on it. So make sure you go to that too.
Sorry, I realised I was talking, I was muted because my dog had been barking. So I thought rather than risk having the dog barking in the great tradition of cameras on or cameras off, I muted myself. But we do have one question come through. So from, I think, Yui is how I pronounce the name. The question for me has been, how can I ensure students are engaged or I engage students when the camera is off? So any thoughts on that? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but what are your feelings on that? Yeah,
I think it's a very good question, a very difficult question. I think it's, like I said, I think building tasks into the session is much more meaningful. I think, like I say, cameras on or off doesn't really tell you that. It just says they're staring at the computer screen. So it's not a great measure anyway. I think if you can build in polls, you can build in tasks. Like David says, the chat box can be used really effectively. We really like using the chat box when we do sessions rather than using breakout rooms and polls and that kind of thing, because it's just simple and people can use it really quickly and we can react to things as they come in. When we've got the luxury of having 2 or 3 presenters, definitely. Yeah, so I think doing that, and some really good advice coming in the chat from practitioners as well. But yeah, I do think cameras for engagement is a red herring, I think, for monitoring engagement. One question that came to my mind was when I've been teaching this year, I teach mostly postgrads because I'm an academic developer, and actually they've been fairly good about turning on their cameras, and I wondered whether there was a sort of an age or confidence thing that comes with, between being perhaps in FE, coming into HE, going into postgrad, whether that was something that you picked up from your research. Yeah, do you want to answer that, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the research is, sorry, it has just started an almighty thunderstorm near me, so if I disappear, you will know. Sorry. Yeah, in the research, it was mainly undergraduates that we saw, but I'm sure that there's more coming through. I know a few people have mentioned that they're doing some studies about this situation at the moment, so hopefully we might see some more research in the area. Like I've got research alerts set up ready for it all, so we can keep on updating as we go along. But yeah, it was mainly like undergraduate and distance learners that we saw this type of research aimed at.
Interesting, thank you. I think the only other comment in the question has been, has Rob uploaded a GIF instead of turning his camera on? Do you want to give a wave, Rob? Perfect.
I believe that's from one of our colleagues, David.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Rob is our man in the chat. That is his role in this.
There is also a big lag as well, I think. So if we've got any other questions, I don't think we have. I'll just quickly check whether anything else has come in. don't think so. So I'm sure there'll be another session, as mentioned, on this a little bit later. And there will also be lots of opportunities for people to go to the other platform and have a chat about this. So do get in touch, I'm sure, with the team from Sheffield if you want to ask any more questions or follow up on any of those findings. So it remains really for me to say thank you very much. That was really, really interesting. Thank you. And to give the traditional round of digital applause in the chat will be super. And to say thank you very much. And it was great to meet you all virtually.
Thank you.
Very much.
I'll pop the a PDF of the slides in the Discord for people.